then, and welcome Debbie to the programme. And Debbie, we've been a lot of news over the last couple of weeks with respect to AstraZeneca and therefore connections to Oxford University. But what have you got for us on this?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you especially to Sam and Kenny who helped me put this segment together, because last week we focused in on Dame Kate Bingham. I'm sure you'll remember. Well, today it's the turn of Dame Sarah Gilbert. But before I introduce Dame Sarah Gilbert and our good friend, Cheryl Granger, who's a pharmaceutical training consultant, I want to set the scene, but I want to set it quite quickly for you so you can see where we're going with this. And if you know somebody that's had an AstraZeneca injection, or indeed you have, I think you'll find this section very interesting. So let's start off with vaccinology, because vaccinology is the next big thing. If you're a doctor or if you've majored in something like immunology, you can become a vaccinologist. And the reason why this is important will become clear in a minute, because according to The Guardian just recently, we know that AstraZeneca has been withdrawn, but they seem to give us the impression that its remarkable success must never be forgotten. Really? Well, it goes on to say that it's so remarkable that actually it saved 6.3 million lives in 2021 alone. Really? I don't know where the evidence for that is. Now, back in April 2020, Oxford announced a partnership with AstraZeneca to upscale their recipe. So what you have to bear in mind here is that Oxford were cooking up the recipe in their chemical kitchen, and then AstraZeneca agreed to upscale it, took the license on to deliver it to everybody's arms. So just want you to, if you just slip back to that slide for 2 seconds, I want you just to take note of the bit there where I've said Oxford University and its spin-out company, Vaccitech. All of that will become clear in a minute. So let's have a look at Oxford. Who is responsible? Who is Oxford? So the Oxford vaccine is a team. So we've got Dame Sarah Gilbert, Professor Andrew Pollard, Professor Teresa Lambe, Dr. Sandy Douglas, Professor Catherine Green, and Professor Adrian Hill. Now, they've been busy developing vaccines for this disease X. So let's go and look at very quickly who this Oxford team is. So Professor Adrian Hill, Jenna, Oxford, Professor of Vaccinology. Then we have Professor Andrew Pollard. He's actually a Professor of Science and Immunity, but with paediatric interests as well. Then Dr. Sandy Douglas, he's into large-scale manufacturing. He was actually responsible for the 2 billion doses, getting them in arms, and he's tied up to the Wellcome Institute as well. Then we've got Teresa Lambe, head of vaccine immunology, vaccinologist. And then we've got Professor Kath Green at the Nuffield and Wellcome Genetics. And of course, let's not forget Professor John Bell, who's just been awarded a Companion of Honour, he was the Regius Professor at Oxford. And then finally, we have Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, who is the lead vaccinologist in Oxford. Now, I want to bring your attention to a company called Barinthus Biotherapeutics. Now, this is a spin-off from the Jenner and Oxford Institutes, and they deal very much in cancer and infectious diseases. Let's have a look at the investors of Barinthus Biotherapeutics. Well, we have Cancer Research UK, we've got Oxford, of course, we've got the Ludwig Cancer Research. But when we go to look at the team for Barinthus, we can see Sarah Gilbert and Adrian Hill, the co-founders of this very company. So I went to Companies House and I looked them up, Barinthus Biotherapeutics, and they were originally Vaccitech. Well, Vaccitech, of course, were the company we just mentioned, the spin-off from Oxford. So let's go a little bit further and have a look at the directors, because we can see that Professor Adrian Hill and Dame Sarah Gilbert both were directors but have resigned. And Dame Sarah Gilbert, she's a very important person. She absolutely loved it when she had a Barbie doll made of her, because this is to promote vaccinology and to try to get youngsters to become vaccinologists. So Dame Sarah Gilbert did a lovely lecture, the Richard Dimbleby lecture, the 44th of Richard Dimbleby lecture, December 2021. Sometimes, words come back to haunt you. Let's have a listen to what some of the things that she said at the lecture.
Usually, we would not start work on the design of a clinical trial until we had completed all the animal trials. That way, if the animals trials showed the vaccine was not safe or not effective, we would not have wasted time preparing clinical trials that could not go ahead. This time, we did all the clinical trial preparation while the animal trials were still going on. That way, it was within days of receiving the safety data from our animal trials that we were putting the first vaccine into the arms of our first volunteers.
And then she went on to say this.
We have also not done well in communicating about the safety and benefits of vaccinating pregnant women. A year ago, when vaccines were first being rolled out, vaccinating pregnant women was not universally recommended. This is the usual approach with new drugs or vaccines. We wait for special studies in animals, vaccinating before or just after conception, and then waiting for the offspring to be born. Then we do a study in pregnant women, and only then is the vaccine recommended for use in pregnant women generally. A year on, it is clear not only that the COVID vaccine is safe for pregnant women and their babies, but also that unvaccinated pregnant women and their babies are at high risk if they become infected with COVID. This information has been slow to reach pregnant women and even some midwives and vaccination centres. Although by April 2021, it was being recommended that they be included in the vaccination rollout in the UK, by the end of October, only 15% of pregnant women had received 2 vaccinations. In hindsight, pregnant women should perhaps have been identified as a priority group for vaccination starting from April. If we had highlighted the benefits rather than only seeking to remove concerns about the risks, we could have avoided some very poor outcomes for pregnant women and their babies. There were also completely unfounded scare stories that vaccines would affect fertility. To be clear, data from vaccine trials and fertility clinics has demonstrated that there is no basis in fact for this claim. But communicating this to people who do not receive that information from mainstream media is a problem we have not yet solved.
Perhaps mainstream media was the problem. And before I bring Cheryl in to comment on what she's just said, I just want to highlight that these 3 dames, Dame Professor Sarah Gilbert, made the AstraZeneca solution. Dame Kate Bingham, she distributed it, she procured it, and Dame June Rain approved it. And on that note, I'm really very grateful to Cheryl, who's got a lot more information on what Dame Sarah Gilbert just said. Cheryl, welcome to UK Column. Thank you so much. And go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Debbie. Hello, everybody. Yes, 3 snippets of video that I just want to comment on. Kate Bingham provided the means to fund global clinical trials. And what you've got to think about is what was known at that time during 2020. So the infection fatality rate was 0.096%. It was listed in Hansard, and the average age of death was 82.5. The virus had been downgraded from a highly infectious disease by the 19th of March before we went into lockdown. And basically, this virus was behaving very differently to any other virus that had ever been known because, for example, in the States, it behaved differently in bordering states. So there are lots of things that we knew about, but in the meantime, fear was being raised to demand a rush to vaccine development and obviously generate a demand. And the lies were being pushed that this vaccine was the only thing that could help in the pandemic. So we were all generating a demand that we needed this vaccine. So we got a venture capitalist to provide funds. They weren't concerned about whether it's a safe and effective treatment. The vaccinologist, with a narrow vision of producing a vaccine at all costs, but they wanted to be the successful vaccine and they wanted to be the first. And that was the bit about the speed. We needed this as soon as possible. And then obviously the clinical trials, they usually follow an application to the MHRA, and then they're reviewed by medical, scientific and ethical experts. And then they follow the Declaration of Helsinki, which shows shows that participants' well-being should take precedence over scientific knowledge. So all that is a background to what she's been saying. And this rush bit from animal trials being held concurrently with the clinical trials is something that's never been done before. So the reason being, it takes about £1 billion to develop a drug. Obviously, they have to get the funding for that. And if they do an animal study and they find out that it's not successful, then that can stop anything being developed further. But in this case, they had the funding and there was no liability, and they did the animal trials, and the clinical trials were being run at the same time. And on top of that, they were manufacturing. They were manufacturing at the same time as they were doing all this. And the MHRA, of course, was doing a rolling review of the data. As it came in, they were reviewing it. So nothing was done in a way that had been done before. So the animal trial should be a bridge between the laboratory work and the patient. It's under strict legislative control, and it should give you confidence that you're not putting your people at risk that are going to be in the clinical trial. And it operates under this good laboratory framework that they should have been adhering to. So let's look at what happened in the animal trials. So Dr. Vanessa Kruger-Schmidt had analysed, very good analysis, of the European medical agencies, what's called open assessment reports from the 29th of January 2021. So this is evidence from AstraZeneca that she looked at. And in particular, on the animal trial data, she basically said they'd looked at mice, ferrets, rhesus monkeys and pigs. And the conclusions were that there was none or only a very slight protective effect seen from the vaccination, immunological responses, antibodies and cytokine release. They basically were not present, or there were only partial differences. The T-cell response after vaccination was limited or absent. Studies basically showed that there was no protective effect against this, which is the basis of the license. AZ vaccine was supposed to protect against the infection. Sorry, Debbie.
I just want to round up very quickly, Cheryl, because I know we're going to be talking about more of this, in particular the pregnancy data as well in Extra. But in your opinion, was Dame Sarah Gilbert lying?
She's lied all the way through, because she covered up the fact that the animal data showed that it wasn't effective. And why would you go any further with it? And then when we get onto the pregnancy comments that she made, she didn't have the evidence to back up what she was saying, unless she was aware of the yellow card vaccine monitor, because that showed that there were problems. There were a lot of side effects that were being witnessed by the 1,300 and odd pregnant women that were in the trial. So she wasn't being truthful when she was actually making those comments. And that was at the end of December 2021. We knew by the February that there'd already been 205 deaths with AstraZeneca. None of that was mentioned.
Cheryl, thank you so much for that. Please tune in for Extra, because there's much more to come on this. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Debbie and Cheryl. So Cheryl will be joining us in Extra, so that's going to be great.